Imagine someone hands you the keys to a perfect utopia. Like, I'm talking about a world where every single human problem has been completely solved.
Right, the ultimate dream.
Exactly. No disease, no aging, no poverty, no war. Everyone is healthy, everyone is safe, and you're just guaranteed this, comfortable, pain-free existence.
Sounds pretty good.
Right. So you walk through the gates of this utopia, you look around at the absolute perfection of it all, and your first reaction is to just shake your head, sigh, and say, this isn't good enough.
It sounds completely absurd. I mean, it sounds like the absolute pinnacle of ingratitude,
Yeah,
right?
totally.
But that precise reaction is, it's the doorway into one of the most fascinating, contradictory, and honestly brilliant minds we've ever encountered on this deep dive.
Yeah, today we are unpacking a giant stack of notes, reconstructions, and philosophical essays centered around a thinker named Arthur Arcturus.
Arthur Arcturus, yeah.
And his entire worldview, which is often labeled, neo-pessimism, it hinges on that exact utopian scenario. He genuinely believes that making peace with the perfect human world, at least as we currently define it, is the ultimate act of despair.
Which completely scrambles our normal philosophical categories.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think back to our prior explorations into negative utilitarianism or the historical spectrums of optimism and pessimism.
Right, the stuff we covered a few deep dives ago.
Exactly. The lines were usually drawn around suffering. The pessimist says the world is full of suffering and therefore bad, and the optimist says, well, the good outweighs the bad. Arthur takes those tools, looks at them, and basically throws them right out the window.
Because to really understand Arthur Arcturus, we have to start with this massive central paradox. Like, who is the real pessimist?
Yeah, that's the core of it.
If you look at Arthur's writings, ordinary people immediately slap the pessimist label on him. And, I mean, to be fair, you can definitely see why.
Oh, absolutely.
He looks at everyday human existence and describes it as broken, humiliating, repetitive.
Biologically cruel.
Yes, biologically cruel and spiritually completely insufficient. He does not sugarcoat the reality of the food chain or disease or aging.
No, not at all. But his inversion of that label is what makes his work so arresting. Arthur claims that the real pessimist is the person who accepts this baseline biological world as enough.
Wow.
Yeah. The real pessimist, in his eyes, is the person who tells you to just lower your standards, be normal, make peace with the suffering, and, find your small, fleeting moments of happiness.
I really love the way the source material phrases this. I want to just bring this concept to the forefront for you listening because it's the lens for literally everything we're about to discuss today.
It's crucial.
The quote is, "The real pessimist is not the one who says this world is unacceptable. The real pessimist is the one who thinks this world is the limit."
That's a staggering thought.
It really is. And before we get too deep into the weeds here, I do want to set a clear boundary for our mission today.
Good idea.
Because Arthur's ideas, they touch on some incredibly abrasive social concepts. He uses terms like the black pill, and he offers these scathing critiques of ordinary social life that have been debated and, honestly, sometimes misused in some pretty dark corners of the internet.
They definitely have been.
So our goal today is to impartially examine the philosophical force of this material. We are here to map his ideas, test their structural integrity, and see what we can learn from them. Without endorsing the rhetoric or getting dragged into internet drama, we're strictly looking at the intellectual insight.
That's a crucial distinction, because if we get distracted by the provocative terminology, we miss the underlying architecture of his thought. To truly grasp Arthur's neo-pessimism, we have to understand that it doesn't stem from a lack of value.
Right.
It's not just simple despair. It is a philosophy of impossible standards.
Impossible standard. And that's a hard concept to wrap your head around at first. He finds ordinary life intolerable, not because he values too little, but because he values too much.
Precisely. Let's return to your opening scenario, the perfect utopia, with no aging and no disease. For Arthur, achieving that wouldn't be the grand finale of human existence. It wouldn't be paradise. It would merely be the absolute minimum baseline for a decent existence.
Right. It's the starting line, not the finish line.
Exactly.
I was thinking about how he views this impossible standard, and his analogy of the violin really grounds it for me.
Oh, the violin metaphor is brilliant. Let's unpack that.
Okay, so think about a master violinist preparing for a concert. Technical perfection is the first requirement, right? You have to play the right notes at the exact right tempo with flawless intonation.
You can't make mistakes.
Right. But the technical perfection isn't the goal of the music, it's just the prerequisite.
It is the condition that makes real playing possible. I mean, if you are struggling to hit the right notes, you aren't really expressing anything, you're just fighting the instrument.
Yeah, you're just doing mechanics.
Exactly. The deeper aim of the music is expression. It's about moving entirely beyond the technique into a state of intensity and spirit, where the instrument itself seems to just vanish. You aren't hearing wood and strings anymore, you're hearing pure emotion, pure form.
So if we apply that to human life, well, if we somehow cured all diseases, stopped aging, fixed our biological frailties, and eliminated poverty, Arthur is saying that's just getting the notes right.
Yes, a world without disease and decay isn't a utopia. It is just the first clean instrument. There's a line from his work that captures this perfectly.
What's the line?
He says, "Perfection is not the dream. Perfection is tuning the instrument."
Wow. Tuning the instrument.
Right. Only after the instrument is fully tuned does the real terrifying question begin. Like, what is consciousness actually for? What can intelligence, beauty, love, and creativity become when they are no longer constantly interrupted by toothaches, cancer, and, the necessity of paying rent?
Okay, let's unpack this, because I have to challenge this premise.
Go for it.
If your standard is so unbelievably high that curing all human disease still leaves you dissatisfied, isn't that practically indistinguishable from clinical depression?
It's a common critique. Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like massive pathological ingratitude. Why can't he just sit on a porch, watch a beautiful sunset, drink a good cup of coffee like a normal person, and say, this is nice, this is enough? Why ruin the present moment with a standard that doesn't even exist?
That is the most common and honestly perhaps the most natural defense against Arthur's philosophy. But his response to that is what makes him so unique. He claims to be wildly optimistic.
Wildly optimistic? How does that even compute?
Because the ordinary optimist looks at a broken, decaying, predatory world. A world where, frankly, every living thing survives by consuming another living thing, where everything ages and dies, and the ordinary optimist says, this is good, this is beautiful.
Right. They find the silver lining.
Yeah. But Arthur refuses to call a broken world good because his optimism is simply too large to fit inside current biological parameters. He looks at that sunset, and he tastes that cup of coffee, and he recognizes the beauty. But he refuses to sever that moment of beauty from the context surrounding it.
So he sees the sunset, but he also sees the food chain.
Exactly. He sees the disease, the decay, and the biological trap that frames that fleeting moment.
So he refuses to betray the ideal just to feel better about reality?
Precisely. His optimism is not gratitude for the given world. It is refusal to betray the impossible ideal. He views the ability to just make peace with the world as a form of spiritual amnesia.
Spiritual amnesia, that's a heavy phrase.
It is. There is a deeply poignant summary of this in the notes. It says, inside every Arthurian pessimist is a disappointed idealist. He isn't wounded by hatred of life. He is wounded by a standard higher than life.
Okay, but to understand why Arthur thinks the current world is so fundamentally broken that it can't house this ideal, we really have to look at how he views the underlying machinery of life.
The biological reality.
Yeah. And to do that, we have to bring in an old friend of this show, Arthur Schopenhauer.
Yes. Arthur Arcturus clearly builds his foundation on a very Schopenhauerian baseline.
Let's give a quick refresher for you listening, just to ground this. Schopenhauer basically argued that the core of all existence is this blind, restless, striving force he called the will.
Right, the endless striving.
And because we're driven by this will, ordinary life is just a pendulum swinging between pain and boredom. You feel a lack, let's say hunger. That lack is painful. You strive to get food, you eat, and for a brief moment, you feel satisfied.
But it never lasts.
Exactly, it doesn't last. It quickly decays into boredom, or a new desire arises and the cycle starts all over again. Fulfillment merely resets the game rather than actually concluding it. As our sources beautifully summarize it, Schopenhauer hears life as hunger wearing 1,000 faces.
That is the perfect distillation of the 19th century pessimistic view. But Arthur Arcturus is a neo-pessimist. He modernizes Schopenhauer.
How does he update it?
Well, he doesn't rely on a mystical, metaphysical will pulsing beneath the cosmos. He looks at the exact same cycle of suffering and striving, but he explains it through the hard lenses of evolutionary psychology, Darwinian selection, and memetics.
Which honestly makes it so much more chilling. We aren't just spiritual beings trapped in a cycle of suffering. We are biological algorithms.
We're the products of genes, drives, mating strategies, status hierarchies, cultural scripts, and severe biological limitations.
We're programmed.
Yes. Evolution didn't design us to be happy. It didn't design us to house impossible ideals or to experience perfect, unbroken tranquility. It designed us for one thing, replication.
Right, survival and reproduction.
And a creature that is perpetually dissatisfied, perpetually striving for the next hit of dopamine, the next status symbol, the next meal. That creature is highly motivated to survive and reproduce. Arthur turns Schopenhauer's will into selection, programming, and mimetic capture.
And this is where Arthur introduces a perceptual trick that completely alters how you view your own life. He calls it the scale problem.
The scale problem, yes.
Yeah. He suggests that we are blind to this algorithmic reality because of the speed at which we experience time.
Time and attention.
Right, both. At our normal, everyday speed, life feels intensely personal. Like, think about your own life right now. You're worried about a project at work, you're navigating a disagreement with your partner, you're excited about an upcoming vacation.
You're tracking local politics.
Yeah, it's a narrative. It's your story.
But Arthur asked us to violently zoom out.
Yeah.
To change the scale of our attention.
Yeah. He says, imagine looking at a photograph of a bustling city street from the year 1890.
Okay.
Every single person in that photo had their own intense, dramatic personal narrative. They had careers, romances, crushing defeats, soaring victories. And now they're all entirely gone, vanished, replaced.
Sobering.
When you zoom out across centuries, the illusion of the personal narrative just dissolves. It doesn't look like a collection of unique stories anymore. It looks like a vast, mechanical replacement algorithm.
Beings pop into existence, they fiercely compete for resources and status, they reproduce, they decay, they die, and they are immediately replaced by the exact same models running the exact same programs.
It's a terrifying shift in perspective. The text says, human life looks personal because we experience the algorithm in slow motion.
That's it, exactly. If you speed up the film of human history, the individual drama collapses. The wars, the romances, the empires, they just look like the churning of an ant colony or the bubbling of a chemical reaction.
Yes.
To see life clearly, Arthur tries to speed up the film until the human drama becomes a process.
You know, it reminds me of playing a massive multiplayer video game.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Imagine you log into this intense virtual world and you get completely obsessed. You spend hours every day grinding to upgrade your virtual house. You argue with other players in the chat. You're desperately trying to collect rare digital coins to increase your status.
You're fully immersed.
You are so deeply immersed in the narrative of the game that you completely forget a crucial piece of information. The server is scheduled to shut down permanently in exactly 1 hour.
Wow.
None of those coins can be taken out of the game. None of it matters the second the screen goes black. You're trapped in a mini-game, treating it like absolute reality.
That is a brilliant analogy.
Oh.
And if we pull that analogy into Arthur's terminology, the realization that the server is shutting down that moment, you look up from your virtual coins and see the real-world clock ticking. That is what Arthur refers to as taking the black pill.
Okay, let's unpack that term because the black pill carries a massive amount of toxic baggage online.
It really does.
It usually implies a sort of hateful, misogynistic, or deeply fatalistic worldview where you just give up entirely.
Which is precisely why we must clearly define how Arthur uses it in a strictly philosophical sense.
Right.
For Arthur, the black pill is not passive nihilism. It isn't wallowing in misery or blaming other people for your problems. The black pill is, as we just discussed, an active scale correction.
Scale correct.
Yes. Your video game analogy highlights this perfectly. The mini-games of human existence are things like the pursuit of money, climbing the corporate ladder, curating a personal brand on social media.
Navigating neighborhood status hierarchies.
Exactly. These mini-games are incredibly engaging. They are designed to hold our attention. But the philosophical black pill happens when those mini-games suddenly fail to hide the larger game.
And the larger game is the server shutting down, its aging, its vulnerability, it's the sheer physical dependency of the human body, and ultimately, death.
Exactly. The text notes that the black pill happens when the mini-games stop hiding the larger game. It's the profound, unshakable realization that the evolutionary algorithm is unwinnable on an individual level.
Right.
You can be the richest person on the planet, you can have the highest status, but the biology always wins in the end.
But wait, I'm struggling with this. If you realize the game is unwinnable and you take this philosophical black pill, what stops you from just lying down on the floor and never getting up? How is this not just a recipe for absolute despair?
Because for Arthur, the realization that the game is rigged is only half the equation. The realization only becomes sterile and self-destructive if you stop thinking.
Stop thinking.
Yeah, the source says the black pill becomes sterile only when it stops asking what could replace the game. It's not about surrendering to the rigged rules. It's about demanding a completely new rulebook.
Ah, I see.
If the current game is structurally flawed, the truly serious philosophical question becomes, well, can the structure itself be rebuilt?
Which leads us directly into what I think is his most devastating and relatable metaphor for human expectation, the parable of the castle.
The architecture of disappointment. This is where Arthur maps his abstract theories directly onto the listener's daily life.
Let me paint this picture for you because it is so incredibly vivid. Imagine you are walking through a dense forest and you're promised that at the end of the path there is a magnificent castle. This castle represents the ultimate fulfillment of your desires. From a distance, as you approach it, it is pure, unblemished ideal. It represents the perfect romance, the incredibly successful career, the flawless family, the deep sense of safety and arrival. It's everything you've been striving for.
It did the dream.
Right. But then you finally reach it. You walk through the heavy front doors.
And the illusion of the distance evaporates. Reality sets in.
Exactly. You look around and the details are all wrong. The stone walls are damaged and crumbling. The great halls are drafty and freezing cold. You realize there's black mold in the basement. The plumbing is constantly leaking.
It's a mess.
At first you think, okay, this isn't perfect, but I have agency. I can fix this. I'll patch the roof. I'll hire someone to fix the pipes. I'll put up some tapestries to block the drafts. But weeks turn into months. And months turn into years, and suddenly you realize that fixing the castle has become your entire life.
You're just maintaining it.
Yeah. You aren't enjoying the grand fulfillment. You're just a janitor in a decaying building. It turns into an endless trap of maintenance, compromise, and exhaustion.
It is a brutal metaphor because the castle isn't just one specific failed dream. It is the very structure of ordinary human aspiration. Think about how this applies to modern life. Think about the corporate ladder.
Oh, yeah.
You work 80-hour weeks in your 20s because you are promised the castle of the corner office. From a distance, that corner office looks like power, freedom, and arrival.
But then you get the promotion, and what is the reality?
The reality is that you now have to deal with endless, soul-crushing administrative emails, managing interpersonal conflicts among your team, appeasing shareholders, and the constant stress of maintaining your position.
You aren't a king, you're just maintaining a draftier part of the castle.
Yeah, exactly. Or think about romance. The cultural script promises the castle of the soulmate, the perfect frictionless union. But the reality of a decades-long marriage is deep compromise, managing household logistics, navigating each other's biological and psychological flaws, and mutual physical decline.
The source material puts it so perfectly. It says, the castle is every promise life makes before reality starts itemizing the costs.
Precisely. And the philosophical weight of this parable is immense. The castle fails because ordinary life cannot house the ideal projected onto it. The physical, biological, and social constraints of human existence are too narrow, too flawed to ever support the weight of the impossible ideal we carry in our minds.
And this explains why Arthur is so dismissive of ordinary self-help culture, or even a lot of standard political reform.
Because self-help is just a manual for renovating a single room inside a structurally condemned castle.
Right. You're reading a book on how to optimize your morning routine so you can be more productive at patching the leaky roof. You're polishing a suit of armor in a hallway that is literally collapsing. You're putting a fresh coat of paint over the black mold and pretending the air is clean.
You do not solve the castle by polishing the armor. You ask why the castle was built this way. That's his exact framing. Arthur's entire project is an attempt to question the fundamental architecture of human existence. He isn't interested in making the drafty halls slightly more comfortable. He wants to know who designed the building and whether we can fire the architect.
But hold on. This is where I struggle again. Let's say I agree with him. The castle is built poorly. Our biology traps us in cycles of maintenance and decay. We are stuck inside.
Right.
If self-help is useless and ordinary optimism is a delusion, what are we supposed to do? Are we really just supposed to sit in the cold, drafty hall, stare at the mold, and complain about evolution? How is that a philosophy of life?
If he stopped there, it wouldn't be. It would just be nihilism. But this is where Arthur pivots from traditional pessimism into something radically, almost shockingly different.
How so?
Because, as we established earlier, Arthur's pessimism is wounded by a standard higher than life. He doesn't just endure the castle. He actively looks for a way to demolish it and build something new from the ground up.
Mm-hmm.
And that brings us to his specific, deeply existential brand of transhumanism.
Okay, this makes sense. If the problem isn't your mindset or your habits or even society, If the problem is the fundamental architecture of biology itself, then the only proportional solution has to be structural.
Exactly. Arthur's pessimism is completely inseparable from transhumanist possibility.
Mhm.
He doesn't look at the human condition and say, we are morally bad. He looks at the human condition and says, we are running on bad hardware.
Bad hardware. Explain what he means by that in a tangible way.
Let's ground it. Aging is bad hardware. The fact that after a few decades, your cellular machinery starts to break down, your joints ache, your cognitive processing slows, and you become vulnerable to a host of terrifying diseases, that is a design failure.
It's a glitch.
Death is a design failure.
Yeah.
Our cognitive limitations, the fact that we can't remember most of our lives, or that we struggle to grasp complex, multivariable problems, that is bad hardware.
Even our emotions, right?
Exactly. Even our emotional landscape.
Yeah.
The way we are enslaved by social programming, the way we feel intense anxiety over abstract status games. These are legacy constraints left over from blind Darwinian evolution. They aren't sacred features of the human soul. They're glitches.
So Arthur's pessimism is not anti-life, it is anti-current implementation.
Precisely.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. I want to push back on the transhumanist angle here, because this is where a lot of modern philosophy gets very ungrounded.
I know where you're going with this.
Is Arthur just a techno-utopian wearing black? Does he genuinely believe that AI and life extension will magically save us? Like Silicon Valley is going to invent a chip, put it on our brains, and suddenly we're saved? Because that sounds exactly like the kind of cheap, naive optimism he claims to despise.
That is a vital distinction to make, and honestly, it's a trap many people fall into when reading him. No, Arthur is absolutely not optimistic about the default trajectory of technology. He doesn't trust that the current economic or political systems will miraculously produce a paradise.
Okay, good.
He isn't saying that technology will save us. He simply recognizes the horrifying scale of the problem. If the biological system is fundamentally defective, then ordinary political or psychological optimism is a delusion. Radical, structural, technological transformation is not guaranteed to work. In fact, it might end in disaster, but it is the only imaginable exit that doesn't just end with the extinction of consciousness.
It's the only tool big enough for the job.
Exactly. Technology does not guarantee redemption. It is simply the first tool large enough for the wound Arthur sees. So transhumanism is the thought that the castle might be demolished rather than endured.
There's another metaphor from the notes that really clarifies his stance on this. It maps it onto something very recognizable: the stock market.
That's the bad stock metaphor. It's incredibly apt.
Yeah. He compares living a human life to holding a terrible, bleeding stock that has extreme upside potential. Let's say you invest in a company. Right now, the company is terribly managed. The CEO is an idiot. Let's call the CEO evolution.
Fitting.
The product is flawed. The asset is bleeding value every single day. Holding this stock humiliates you as an investor. Every rational metric says you should sell and walk away.
Would you read a Roomba?
Right. You know that there is a non-zero chance that this terrible company might stumble into a massive world-changing breakthrough. The stock might go to the moon. In Arthur's philosophy, that breakthrough is the technological singularity, post-human intelligence, or radical life extension. It might moon. So his stance toward life isn't peaceful contentment. It isn't a Zen-like acceptance. It's a white-knuckled, teeth-gritting patience.
He's holding the bag.
He is holding the bag, enduring the losses, simply waiting it out, as the notes say. He is in it until the lights go out, or until the lights become something else.
And exploring what happens if the lights go out requires us to introduce a rather delicate, dark subject within his framework, the concept of the last class.
Yes, let's be extremely careful and clear here. For everyone listening, we need to clarify strictly that this is a philosophical metaphor for release from a bad structure. It is absolutely not a romanticization of self-harm, nor is it advocating harm to anyone else. We are discussing how a philosopher categorizes the compulsory nature of biological existence.
Agreed. The framework is what matters here.
Yeah.
In Arthur's view, because we did not choose to be born into this specific biological hardware, ordinary life is experienced as a forced assignment, a compulsory ordeal.
Like a class you can't drop.
Yes. It is like being forced to sit through a grueling, seemingly endless, poorly taught class that you never even registered for.
And in this metaphor, death is not a tragedy. Death appears as the final bell ringing. It is the last day before summer vacation. It is the release from the imposed structure.
Exactly. The notes state that the last class is not a program. It is the image of release when life has become compulsory.
So it's a return to that Schopenhauerian desire for release from the striving. But This creates a massive, almost unbearable contradiction in Arthur's philosophy, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, on one hand, he looks at the force assignment of life and views death as the ultimate release, the escape from the dreaded castle. But on the other hand, through his transhumanist ideals, he actively advocates for radical life extension. He absolutely refuses to accept death as a natural necessity. How can he hold both of those thoughts at the same time?
It is the ultimate contradiction. But if you look closely at the architecture of his thought, it actually makes perfect sense. He hates the conditions of life, the bad hardware, the decay, the suffering, but he refuses to let the lights simply go out because he still holds on to that impossible ideal.
He wants the ideal to be realized.
Yes. He doesn't want to die. He wants to be cured of biology. Arthur does not simply want life or death. He wants the bad structure to end. He is demanding a third option that doesn't currently exist.
Okay, so we have this overarching hope, or maybe it's just a desperate gamble, that someday the hardware will be fixed, we'll demolish the castle and build a starship.
Someday.
But we don't live in that post-human future. We live right now. So what are we supposed to do today while we wait for the bulldozer, while we hold the bad stock? What happens to our minds? How does consciousness organize itself in the meantime without going completely insane?
That question brings us to what might be Arthur's most practical, crucial, and controversial idea. He calls it self-structure allotropy, or SSA.
I really need an ELI 5 on this because self-structure allotropy sounds like a phrase designed to confuse people. Let's use the chemistry analogy from the text because it provides a fantastic visual.
Perfect. Let's look at the element carbon.
Right. In chemistry, an allotrope is a different structural form of the exact same element. So if you take carbon atoms and arrange them in a loose, sheet-like structure, you get graphite.
Right, pencil lead.
Yeah. Graphite is soft, it smudges easily, it breaks under pressure. But if you take those exact same carbon atoms and you subject them to immense heat and pressure deep within the Earth, their internal organization changes completely. They form a rigid, interlocking lattice, and you get a diamond.
Which is incredibly hard.
One of the hardest, most resilient substances in the universe. It's the exact same base material, but a radically different internal arrangement.
And Arthur takes this principle from chemistry and applies it directly to human psychology and selfhood. Self-structure allotropy says the same human material can crystallize into different kinds of self. We are all made of broadly similar biological material, the same genes, the same basic brain structures, but our internal organization, our cognitive software, can be crystallized in radically different ways.
He contrasts the baseline arrangement, which he calls the standard human, with a new structure he calls the ego builder. Now, we need to pause here and define ego carefully, because in modern parlance, an ego builder sounds like a narcissist who spends all day taking selfies and talking about how great they are.
Yes, Arthur uses the term technically, not colloquially. It has nothing to do with vanity. To understand the ego builder, we first have to understand the standard human.
The graphite.
Exactly. The standard human structure is graphite. It is socially native. It operates entirely inside the ancient evolutionary game we discussed earlier. The standard human desperately wants social acceptance. They crave status within their peer group. They play tribal politics. They seek physical and emotional comfort, and they conform to the cultural scripts handed to them.
And crucially, Arthur isn't saying this is a moral failing. It's just default programming.
Exactly. It's literally how we were designed by evolution to survive on the savannah. If you didn't care about group acceptance, you were exiled and you died. The ordinary self is adapted to the tribe before it is adapted to truth.
But the ego builder, the diamond in this analogy, is organized completely differently. The ego builder organizes their entire internal structure around agency, intelligence, beauty, and long-range, almost post-human development. And to do this, they have to actively fight their own evolved impulses.
This is where the mechanisms of SSA become clear. How do you become an ego builder? It requires immense internal friction.
Heat and pressure.
Heat and pressure? Exactly. It means actively delaying gratification when every biological instinct screams for a quick dopamine hit. It means enduring intense social isolation because you refuse to play the superficial status games of your peer group. It means refusing the warm, comforting embrace of the herd in order to build an austere, resilient internal order.
Wow.
The ego builder is not a narcissist. The ego builder is a self-authoring structure.
It sounds exhausting.
It is a profound, lifelong resistance. Ego building is rebellion against the default design. Arthur essentially sees the ego builder not just as a psychological personality type, but as a prototype. They are an attempt to be a post-human trapped in an antiquated primate body. Self-structure allotropy is retrocomputing the post-human on obsolete hardware.
And this gives rise to my absolute favorite metaphor in all of his work. It's funny, but it's also deeply tragic. The metaphor of the enterprise engineer.
Oh, it captures the profound alienation of the ego builder perfectly.
He says that living as this kind of self-authoring, crystallized structure in the modern world feels like being a highly trained engineer, someone designed to operate the warp core of the Starship Enterprise. But you've been assigned to work at a Starbucks.
It's an ontological mismatch.
Yeah.
A fundamental clash of design and environment.
Exactly. The ego builder has structured their mind for starship-scale problems. They want to engage with deep space navigation, impossible scientific coordination, reality-bending creativity, the redesign of consciousness itself.
But what do they actually do?
The physical and social world they wake up in every morning assigns them espresso shots. They have to make small talk about the weather, navigate petty office politics, adhere to polite, meaningless schedules, and play neighborhood status games. And the tragedy isn't just that it's boring, it's a structural humiliation. The hardware and social reality of the world are simply too small for the software of the mind they've built.
But we had to apply a very strict caution here. Because if you aren't extremely careful with how you interpret this, the enterprise engineer metaphor just sounds like the most toxic, insufferable arrogance imaginable.
Yeah. I'm a misunderstood genius, my mind is a starship, and all of you ordinary people are just mindless NPCs making my coffee.
Right. It's a very slippery slope. It can easily drift into elitism or a moral caste system where the diamonds look down on the graphite with utter contempt.
Which is why the strongest and most useful interpretation of SSA is architectural, not hateful. The realization that you are at Starbucks shouldn't become contempt for the other baristas. It should become a radical critique of the biological and social conditions that keep most selves organized around those ancient, unfulfilling games.
Why is society structured like a Starbucks instead of a starship?
Yes. The point is not to hate ordinary humans. The point is to ask what ordinary humanity has been optimized for.
Okay, so let's say the ego builder avoids the trap of arrogance. They are trapped making lattes, retrocomputing the post-human, holding on to this impossible ideal of the starship. How do they bridge the gap? Because there is an immense agonizing tension between the perfect ideal inside their head and the flawed, decaying reality outside. How do they survive that tension without just snapping in two?
This is where Arthur's philosophy takes a turn that is unexpectedly beautiful, and it provides the mechanism for survival. The answer is art.
Art.
In Arthur's view, art is the deepest key that unlocks his entire system. Because while reality may fail to instantiate the ideal, that doesn't make the ideal meaningless. The ideal exists in the mind, and it does not need reality's permission to be true.
So art is the bridge between the impossible inside and the broken outside.
Exactly. When a composer writes a transcendent piece of music, or an author writes a brilliant novel, or a painter captures a sublime landscape, they are allowing the internal, impossible ideal to become partially, temporarily real in a shared space.
Art is the place where the impossible ideal becomes partially real.
Let's bring back the violin metaphor from the very beginning of our deep dive. We said that technical perfection is just tuning the instrument.
Right.
But when the master violinist actually begins to play, and they pour their entire self into the performance, the technique becomes completely transparent. The physical notes, the wood, the rosin, they all disappear. And the inner form, the pure spirit of the music, passes straight through the physical world and into the minds of the audience. The violinist becomes free when the notes disappear.
It is a moment of pure transcendence, but it's fleeting, which is why Arthur refers to art as a consolation prize.
Yeah, and I have to admit, when I first read that, it sounded incredibly demeaning to artists. Like, oh, sorry we couldn't give you a perfect universe without suffering. Here's a nice painting to look at instead. Thanks for playing. It sounds dismissive.
It sounds dismissive only if you underestimate the depth of his pessimism regarding the physical world. For Arthur, it's actually a profound consolation. Art is second prize in a metaphysically ruined contest.
What would first prize have been?
First prize would be a physical universe that actually housed the ideal perfectly.
Yeah.
First prize is a world without death, without decay, where the starship is real and Starbucks doesn't exist.
But we didn't get first prize.
No, we got the broken, drafty castle. So art is the undeniable proof that the inner ideal isn't just a hallucination. It is proof that something higher, something pristine, can take form and temporarily cross into this ruined reality and move another conscious mind to tears. Have you ever wondered why truly beautiful music often makes people cry?
I mean, I always assumed it was just emotional resonance.
Under Arthur's framework, you cry because the music is a reminder of the home you were exiled from, a home that doesn't physically exist yet. It's a reminder of the impossible ideal.
Wow. So it's a profound comfort, but it's also a devastating indictment of reality.
Yes, art consoles because the inner world can appear, it accuses, because ordinary reality cannot sustain it. The symphony ends, the lights come up in the concert hall, and you have to walk back out into the cold rain and go back to your job. Reality cannot sustain the note.
So let's synthesize these major pillars we've uncovered. Self-structure allotropy is the internal reorganization of the mind, hardening into a diamond around the impossible ideal. Art is the partial, temporary externalization of that ideal into the physical world, proving it exists.
And transhumanism.
Transhumanism is the wild, desperate hope of actually redesigning the physical world to house that ideal permanently. Art is the prototype of paradise engineering.
It is a towering, tragic, and strangely beautiful system. It accounts for biology, psychology, technology, and aesthetics.
But here comes the hammer. I was waiting for this. We can't just let him get away with a perfect system.
But does it hold up to structural scrutiny? If we bring in the tools from our previous deep dives, specifically internalism and negative utilitarianism, we have to test the bedrock of Arthur's grand architecture. And when we apply those stress tests, we find a significant wobble.
So what does this all mean when we put him under the microscope? When we apply the internalist lens we developed in past discussions, what breaks? It seems to me that his weakness isn't that he sees too much wrong with the world. His diagnosis of the castle feels pretty accurate.
Oh, absolutely.
His weakness is that his foundation for why it's wrong is unstable.
Exactly. Arthur excels at diagnosing the structural failures of biology and the psychological alienation of the ego builder. But he lacks a stable internalist account of why suffering fundamentally matters, why beauty matters, or why agency matters. He operates entirely on the aesthetic of the ideal because he lacks that grounding in the actual physics of feeling, which is what internalism provides. His thought oscillates wildly.
It's like a top spinning out of control.
Yes, he swings from bright, generative creativity and ego building to a sneering hatred of mediocrity, to a Schopenhauerian desire for the last class and cosmic despair, and then back to white-knuckled patience waiting for technology to save us. Arthur has escape velocity, but not always a stable orbit.
I see it. He can say, the world is fundamentally unacceptable, so let's transform it with radical technology and build the starship. But in the exact same breath, he can pivot and say, the world is unacceptable, so let's just wait for the last class for the lights to go out because it's all a bad assignment anyway.
Exactly.
Without a core foundation, how do you choose between building a supercomputer or just walking away from the game entirely? Without a foundation, the impossible ideal can become either art, technology, or annihilating patience.
And this is precisely where internalism steps in to correct the wobble in Arthur's worldview. Let's do a quick ELI 5 on internalism and valence for our listeners to make sure this lands. Valence is simply the intrinsic positive or negative feel of an experience.
Right.
Suffering has a negative valence. Joy or peace has a positive valence. Internalism argues that valence is the only thing that inherently matters in the universe. A universe with no feeling beings in it has no value, positive or negative.
Yeah.
It's just dead rocks.
Right. So a shiny new technological utopia is only actually good if it feels good to the conscious beings inside it.
Exactly. And internalism asks Arthur a very simple, devastating question. What is all this transformation for? It's not just to achieve an abstract ideal. It's not just for massive technological scale. It's not just to make the ego bigger or to be smarter than an ape or for mere survival.
So what's it for?
Transformation is justified only when it makes life structurally answerable to valence, to reducing suffering, to cultivating profound peace, to generating sublime beauty that can actually be felt. The standard is not scale, ego, or finality. The standard is whether form becomes answerable to valence.
So we can actually map Arthur against the other philosophical titans we've studied on this show. Schopenhauer looked at the world, said life is endless suffering, so we should deny the will and seek nothingness.
Right.
Nietzsche looked at the suffering and said, no, we should overcome it, embrace the struggle, and create immense strength. David Pearce looks at suffering and says, it's just a biological problem that we can engineer away with biotechnology. Where exactly does Arthur fit in that pantheon?
The synthesis is brilliant. It perfectly situates him. Arthur is Schopenhauer with a violin, Nietzsche with bad hardware, and pierce before the foundation stabilizes.
Schopenhauer with a violin, Nietzsche with bad hardware. That is an absolutely incredible summary. But he needs that internalist foundation to keep him from going off the rails, doesn't he? Because an impossible ideal left unchecked by the reality of suffering can become incredibly dangerous.
It is the great danger of all utopian thought. The ideal becomes dangerous when it stops listening to the field it wants to redeem. If you are only chasing an abstract concept of perfection, the perfect starship, the perfect society, you might end up crushing actual experiencing suffering beings in the process.
You might look at the graphite standard humans and decide they're just in the way.
Exactly. Arthur needs internalism because the ideal alone cannot tell us how to treat what feels.
It provides the guardrails.
Yes. Internalism takes Arthur's annihilating patience, his willingness to just hold the bad stock and wait for the end, and turns it into a practical, ethical criterion. Don't just sit in the drafty hall waiting for the castle to collapse or waiting for a magical AI to fix it. Ask what kind of transformation actually answers the wound of suffering right now. How can we reduce negative valence today while we work toward the post-human future? Internalism turns Arthur's patience into a criterion.
Okay, let's bring this all together. Arthur Arcturus has given us a massive, challenging, and frankly exhausting contribution to philosophy. He makes you question everything from your career to your biology. But his ultimate gift to us is the power of refusal.
The power of refusal.
He refuses the cheap Silicon Valley optimism that ignores structural suffering. He refuses biological naturalism, the idea that just because nature made us this way, it must be good. He refuses to lower his standards just to feel comfortable at Starbucks. Arthur's gift is the refusal to confuse adaptation with truth.
Which culminates in a staggering, perspective-shifting question. Throughout history, most philosophers, from Camus to Schopenhauer, eventually arrive at the same basic inquiry. Is life worth living? Arthur bypasses that entirely and asks something far more demanding.
What's the question?
Arthur's question is not whether life is worth living, it is whether life is worthy of consciousness.
And that leaves us with a final provocative thought. Something for you to mull over as you go about your day, as you navigate the drafty hallways of your own castle. Arthur teaches us that the real pessimist is the one who stops asking what consciousness could become. The real pessimist settles for the baseline.
They do.
But I want you to consider this for yourself. What if, tomorrow, the wild gamble of transhumanism actually succeeded? Imagine you wake up and the castle has been completely demolished and rebuilt overnight. Disease, aging, biological vulnerability, the petty struggles for resources, the stupidity of the evolutionary algorithm, all of it is eradicated. You are handed the perfectly tuned violin of your own biology. The instrument is flawless.
It's tuned.
What song would you actually play?
It is the ultimate terrifying freedom. If all our familiar excuses of bad hardware and biological struggle were stripped away, what is the impossible ideal you would be forced to face in the deafening silence of a perfect world?
If the X-ray machine of reality is finally fixed and the fuel gauge of existence reads completely unconditionally full, what do we do next? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the architecture of your own castles.